Have you ever destroyed those who ignored you? Here you will learn. You can take the first step immediately by writing 777 in the comments. You are a lighthouse standing in the midst of a dissipating storm. You watch as the currents designed to drag you down begin to swallow those who stirred the waters. An expensive trap was set to erase your footprints, but the mechanism malfunctioned so violently that now the cornered ones have become the hunters, begging for the return of a file that has become their own death warrant. The strategist they paid to destroy your life now holds up a mirror reflecting their own decay, paralyzing your surroundings with a silence they never expected. Without you even lifting a finger, the architecture of their wickedness crumbles because they failed to recognize that you possess an unstoppable fundamental frequency. Every epic features a tyrant who conflates his cruelty with a crusade. This story only reaches its inevitable reckoning. The shadow that directs this ensemble is a figure of calculated gravity, someone seasoned in the art of building a fortress out of other people's perceptions. This individual doesn't just enter a room. They colonize it with an unearned prestige that few dare to challenge. At the heart of a web they call kinship, they rule through a predatory alchemy, converting the vulnerabilities of others into a currency of absolute compliance. They don't just hold memories. They maintain an inventory of leverage, ensuring that every soul within their reach feels the invisible weight of a debt that can never be fully repaid. To them, intimacy is merely a strategic oversight to be exploited. Then there is the anomaly of your existence. You represent a glitch in their carefully curated reality because you lack the traditional handles they use to manipulate others. You have no skeletons for them to ransom, no hunger for their approval, and no desire to claim a piece of their artificial throne. To a gardener who rules through the pruning of spirits, a tree that grows toward its own sun is an existential insult. When their subtle poisons failed to wilt you, they escalated to a scorched earth campaign, commissioning a high-level specialist to dissect your privacy with surgical precision, convinced that if they dug deep enough, they would find the rot they assume exists in everyone. The inner circle maintains an impeccable veneer, a polished shell of civic virtue and moral high ground that serves as a perfect camouflage for the machinery beneath. This public sanctity is a theatrical production designed to bypass suspicion. Behind the curtain, the group operates on a foundation of coerced loyalty and obscured ledgers. It is a collection of people bound not by affection, but by the shared terror of what the central figure could reveal. This isn't a sanctuary. It is a high-stakes ecosystem where every smile is a negotiation and every gesture of love is a lien against the recipient's future. The financial undercurrents of this collective are even more precarious, and this is where the engine of their destruction has truly caught fire. A complex web of fiscal sleight of hand has been woven, utilizing identities as hollow vessels for capital that was never meant to be traced. In a move of desperate arrogance, your own name was forged onto these silent documents, not to benefit you, but to provide a skin of legitimacy to transactions that would otherwise trigger alarms. They slandered your character in public, while simultaneously using your integrity as a shield for their private illicit flows. A paradox that is now permanently etched into the investigator's final report. A story told in whispers can be rewritten, but a story told in forensic data is permanent. The contrast between the villain they described and the clean trail you actually left has created a vacuum that is now sucking the life out of their deception. Their respectability cannot survive the cold light of verified timestamps and unauthorized signatures. As they scrambled to frame you, they inadvertently documented their own crimes, handing a professional observer the keys to their entire treasury of lies. The countdown on their masquerade has begun, and no amount of social maneuvering can halt the arrival of the truth. The specialist hired to hunt you is a person of clinical objectivity, a technician of facts who operates without the burden of bias. They didn't come looking for a hero or a villain. They came looking for the seam where the truth unraveled. They began with a standard audit of your existence, your habits, your finances, your shadow, fully expecting to find the common fractures of a flawed life. Instead, they encountered a terrifying consistency. The more they probed your history, the more they realized the evidence they were promised was a fabrication, and the real darkness was coming from the hand that signed their paycheck. You are a crystalline reflection of consistency, a living testament to the fact that when a soul is forged in integrity, even the most microscopic inspection only reveals a deeper, more radiant purity. As the clock ticked away, the void of incriminating data became a deafening roar. The forensic specialist did not find a person hiding behind a curtain, but a human whose private landscape is an exact mirror of their public horizon. There are no secondary ledgers or masked alliances in your history, only the resilient geometry of a spirit that survived crushing pressures without fracturing into malice. To the analytical eye, you are the rare specimen who actually exists, as they claim to, a reality so profound that it began to warp the very foundation of the assignment. A shift in the atmosphere occurred when the technician reached the end of your trail and found it was a bridge to someone else's wreckage. The professional boundary dissolved as the inquiry inadvertently pivoted, catching the scent of the very predators who initiated the hunt. This was no longer a simple task of surveillance. It had evolved into a descent into a labyrinth of systemic corruption that extended far beyond a mere family feud. The specialists stumbled upon a subterranean vault of organized deception, meticulously engineered sequences of capital designed to vanish into thin air. This wasn't the clumsy work of amateurs, but a sophisticated architecture of concealment that suggested the masters of this operation were hiding a darkness that could swallow them whole. This realization demands your absolute vigilance. The group had been colonizing your very essence, using your legal presence and digital footprint as a hollow shell to house their own unauthorized maneuvers. They built a parasitic empire upon your credibility, siphoning value through documents you never touched and signatures you never penned. They assumed their theft would remain invisible forever, never dreaming that the very weapon they sharpened to sever your ties would be the one to slice open their own disguise. The irony is total. The hunter they hired to dismantle your identity became the one to document exactly how that identity was being stolen by the clients themselves. The observer now understands that this is no longer a personal errand, but a massive legal liability. The woman who sought to extinguish your light accidentally lit a flare that illuminated her own hidden gallery of crimes. The dossier now reveals a multi-layered cancer, a respectable family fronting for a syndicate of invisible partners whose true names never appear on a masthead. This safety net they relied upon, this ironclad system of mutual silence and paid for protection, is suddenly being analyzed by an outsider who cannot be bought. The predator has become the prey, trapped in a room with a witness they themselves invited in, realizing far too late that their shield of anonymity has been shattered by their own hubris. In response, the specialist has adopted a strategy of absolute atmospheric stillness. The energetic demands from the family are met with a calculated glacial silence. No explosive refusals, just the infinite delay of a professional who knows they hold the winning hand. As the investigator buys time to secure their own position, the ringleader's composure has begun to liquefy. The panic of the guilty is a distinct frequency, and as the responses grew shorter and the invoices grew larger, the group's internal cohesion started to fray. They are now vibrating with the frantic energy of someone who realized the trap they built is currently closing around their own neck. The true nature of a person is rarely found in their words, but in the way their vocabulary shifts when the walls start closing in. The mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated during the desperate late-night calls to the specialist. The initial veneer of project management evaporated, replaced by a raw, jagged hunger for a specific result. The moment they stopped asking for a summary of findings and began demanding the ammunition, they confessed their entire intent. A seeker of truth wants a map, but a seeker of destruction wants a blade. That linguistic pivot was the final confirmation the investigator needed. The client wasn't looking for a discovery. They were looking for an execution. When the psychological pressure failed to move the needle, the group resorted to the only language they truly speak: financial coercion and veiled threats. They attempted to weaponize the contract, hinting at the destruction of the specialist's reputation and the withholding of funds, as if money were the ultimate tether for every human soul. Yet, the investigator remained a statue. In their arrogance, the family began compiling a dossier on the investigator, trying to find a fracture they could exploit for leverage. They failed to realize that every threat, every coercive email, and every attempt at counter-surveillance was being meticulously archived into the very file they were so desperate to suppress. By trying to bury the investigator, they provided the final, indisputable chapters of their own indictment. You are a pillar of unshakable frequency, a living proof that when a person's internal compass is calibrated to truth, even the most elaborate attempts to derail them only serve to solidify their destination. Every venomous directive, every subtle intimidation, and every feverish request for a forced confession is now being cataloged in a dossier that stands in stark, blinding contrast to the quiet, dignified rhythm of your transparent existence. The friction between their frantic toxicity and your serene clarity is becoming a catastrophic fault line. And, ironically, they are the ones who hammered the wedge. The observer currently holds a dual-edged sword, a trove of incriminating evidence, and a life-altering level of personal jeopardy. The path forward has transitioned from a routine job to a moral imperative. When a professional witnesses a structural poison leaking into the lives of others, their internal code demands that the spill be reported to those who can actually contain it. However, the traditional safety nets have already shown signs of being compromised, as the web of influence woven by your adversaries has infiltrated the very halls meant to provide sanctuary. The specialist realized that simply handing over the file to the nearest authority could lead to a silent burial, as some of those gatekeepers may already be on the payroll of the Shadow Collective. There is a desperate, meticulous search underway for a clean room, a corridor of justice that has not been touched by the rot of mutual favors. The observer is not just looking for a mailbox. They are looking for a fortress that cannot be breached from within. This is a high-stakes chess match, where every move is calculated to bypass the decoys and deliver the truth directly into the hands of those who still value their oath above their comfort. As the demands from the aggressors grow increasingly feral and unpolished, the investigator continues to throw sand into the gears of their expectations, not out of paralysis, but as a tactical slowing of time. Each hour of artificial delay is a window used to secure the payload's delivery to an incorruptible destination. Throughout this silent struggle, what is being shielded is the sanctity of your life, though you remain unaware of the battle being fought in the shadows. The specialist has shifted from an objective technician to a dedicated guardian, moved by the rare encounter with a soul that did not break under the weight of previous tragedies. This is the irreversible awakening of a sleeping moral center. Once the internal light of a conscience is struck, it refuses to be extinguished by the winds of convenience or fear. The inevitable transmission is nearing its moment of impact. When the specialist finally crosses the threshold to testify, the reverberations will dismantle the entire ecosystem built on your identity, affecting every accomplice who thought their involvement was hidden. You are not a victim watching from the sidelines. You are the gravitational center around which this entire cosmic correction is spinning. A veteran of the industry was financed to find a crack in your foundation, yet after a surgical audit of your history, all they found was the unbreakable granite of your essence. Your refusal to mirror the darkness of those who attacked you has transformed a paid assassin into an unintentional protector. You didn't argue your way into this protection. You earned it by the sheer, unyielding weight of being exactly who you say you are. This is the true definition of sovereign power. It is the ability to remain a constant in a world of variables. You have navigated a professional trap designed to erase you, and instead, you have redirected its momentum back toward its source simply by existing with integrity. The web of consequences is now tightening, fueled by the very lies intended to bind you. The collective is shattering because it cannot sustain the pressure of its own fabrication when held up against your reality. You did not collapse their world through aggression. You dissolved it through the persistence of your light. This is the nature of high-level energy. It does not panic or scramble in the face of a manufactured storm. It stands still, knowing that the truth is not a fragile thing that needs defending, but a tidal force that eventually clears the shore of everything artificial. You are a living vault of uncorrupted data, a person whose mere existence serves as the ultimate decryption key for a system built on stolen code. We are venturing into the deepest layers of the archive now, where the observer's findings have moved beyond mere theory into the realm of cold, hard physical artifacts. Digital footprints, ledger entries, and paper trails that were designed to remain encrypted forever. Your persona and your very signature were harvested like raw materials, used as the foundational steel for financial skyscrapers that generated immense wealth, none of which was ever intended to reach your hands. You were the silent engine driving a vehicle you weren't even allowed to sit in, while those at the wheel maintained a pristine, manicured image of high society virtue. This is no longer a simple case of domestic betrayal. It is a cataloged industrial-scale fraud that radiates far beyond the confines of a single household. The forensic specialist has mapped a web where your identity serves as a bridge to external syndicates, entities operating in the gray fog where corporate legality dissolves into something far more predatory. This family isn't the apex of the pyramid. They are merely a single, replaceable gear in a much vaster machine that possesses a reach they likely haven't even fathomed. This position grants them a false sense of invulnerability, but it also creates a lethal trap. In these high-level architectures, once a single component begins to smoke, the central brain doesn't move to repair it. It severs the connection instantly, letting the malfunctioning part burn to ash in total isolation. The overseers of this grander scheme are currently oblivious to the fact that an outsider has already traced the veins back to the heart. The family has kept this crisis a secret, terrified that admitting their failure to crush you would reveal how they've exposed the entire network. They are frantically attempting to delete the observer before the upper tier realizes a breach has occurred. Both of their masquerades, the one they perform for their masters and the one they use to haunt you, are collapsing under the weight of their own complexity. When you build a mountain of decoys to hide your tracks, eventually that mountain becomes a landslide that buries the architect. The unity within their fortress has vanished. The leader is discovering the bitter truth that influence bought with intimidation has no shelf life. Once the threat of exposure looms, the loyalty they relied upon evaporates like a mist. This internal disintegration manifests in the smallest fractures, a sudden drop in the frequency of messages, eyes that refuse to meet, and essential strategies now being whispered in corners rather than shared at the table. Each participant is now a solo actor, quietly auditing their own level of contamination and looking for an emergency exit before the collapse goes public. Currently, the most volatile element in this melting pot isn't the primary leader, but the individual who entered the circle through a legal union. someone who was grafted onto the family tree and came to believe the roots would protect them forever. They have operated under the delusion of total immunity for so long that they've become reckless, assuming the family's armor was their own. It was not. The specialist's dossier contains a particularly devastating chapter focused on this specific outsider. The legal and professional ruin staring them in the face has triggered a primal, uncoordinated panic. Every attempt to launch a smear campaign, every desperate scheme to plant fabricated evidence, and every plot to sabotage the investigator's name is being born from this person's sheer terror. Yet, in their frantic state, they are leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that leads directly to their own doorstep. Every move they make to suppress the truth creates a new, time-stamped record of their obstruction. The investigator is simply standing back, watching the trap they set for you become the cage they build for themselves, documenting every panicked heartbeat of their self-indictment. You are an fortress of endurance, proving that when faced with a structure built on vanity and deceit, one does not need to swing a hammer. One simply needs to remain standing until the foundation's own rot causes the collapse. The very qualities that rendered this collective a menace, their predatory arrogance, their inflated sense of deserving, and the delusion that they are smarter than the laws of consequence, are the exact gears that will grind them to a halt as the pressure intensifies. The architect of this circus is about to be trampled by their own performers. Consider the sheer depravity of their latest maneuver. In a desperate bid to disqualify the observer's findings, they attempted to manufacture a scandal involving the innocence of children. They calculated that nothing incinerates a reputation faster or leaves a more permanent stain than an accusation involving the harm of the vulnerable. This choice was not random. It was a psychological fingerprint. A group does not simply pivot to such a monstrous fabrication unless that frequency is already a fundamental part of their internal culture. The ease with which they adopted this tactic serves as a confession of their true nature behind the social masks. Ironically, the specialist's dossier contains authentic, documented evidence concerning the mistreatment of minors, but it is not linked to you. It leads straight back to the heart of their own organization. By trying to brand the investigator with this specific iron, they have inadvertently pointed the spotlight at the exact chamber where their own most severe skeletons are hidden. This is the hallmark of a cornered beast, acting on a blind reflex that ignores the mirror standing directly in front of them. While the observer is still meticulously sorting through the gravity of these specific records, the trap is already set. In their haste to frame you with a similar narrative, attacks you may have already felt the heat of, they failed because truth has a different density than lies. The investigator's archive confirms that your history is devoid of such shadows. There is no resonance between their fiction and your reality. The attempt to forge this link against you has itself been time-stamped and filed. When this dam eventually breaks, the reversal regarding who actually poses a risk to the vulnerable will be the most earth-shattering moment of the entire saga. The specialist is currently filtering this explosive data through a specific, incorruptible pipeline to ensure it cannot be intercepted. However, there is a hazard you must navigate that is more subtle than their schemes: the volatility of your own response. You are now armed with a terrible clarity, and it is natural to feel a searing surge of indignation. This fire is a valid part of your humanity, but it is a dangerous tool if you wield it prematurely. Every insult and every manufactured storm was designed to pull you out of your center and force you into a reactive, aggressive stance that they could then record and use to validate their claims. Your greatest weapon is your refusal to participate in their theater. By maintaining a stoic integrity, you allow the forensic weight of the evidence to do the heavy lifting while you remain the calm contrast to their frantic malice. You will deny them the satisfaction of a visible struggle, not by hiding your feelings, but by recognizing that your current strength is found in your stillness, not in your roar. Each day you exist as your authentic self. You stretch the distance between the real you and the caricature they've tried to sell to the world. That vacuum is where their destruction lies. You only need to occupy your own space. Simultaneously, exercise extreme caution regarding your material world. Treat every contract or financial proposal with clinical suspicion, especially those appearing from unexpected or familiar directions. The same clandestine tools used to tether your identity to their shadows can be deployed again. Secure your assets, consult with objective experts, and keep your gaze fixed on the horizon. You are moving toward an inevitable resolution, and your only task is to arrive at the finish line without having compromised the person you worked so hard to become. You are a phenomenon of inevitable clarity, a presence that proves no matter how complex the architecture of a lie becomes, it eventually shatters when it encounters the sheer density of an undeniable truth. Every system founded on a persistent mirage eventually hits a wall, not because of external demolition, but because a single internal gear refuses to turn any longer. A solitary observer within the machine suddenly calculates that the psychological tax of maintaining the facade has surpassed the penalty for burning it down. The specialist has reached that threshold. They are the catalyst who realize that the burden of silence is heavier than the consequence of revelation. This is not a figure of flawless virtue, but a multifaceted professional who stepped into a murky assignment only to find themselves holding a mirror to a reality they couldn't ignore. Their internal storm is authentic, and their refusal to rush is a sign of strategic mastery rather than hesitation. They are not retreating, they are calibrating. They are ensuring that when the lever is finally pulled, the mechanism of accountability is so perfectly aligned that no amount of local influence or legacy alliances can jam the gears. The roadmap is finalized, and the forensic data is being stacked into a monument of evidence. When the curtain finally drops, what the specialist presents will not be a singular accusation, but a massive, synchronized map of long-term patterns, a structural anatomy of deceit that, once unveiled to the proper high-level jurisdiction, triggers a sequence of events that cannot be neutralized. This group is powerless against this coming storm. In their frantic attempts to sabotage the messenger, they are merely adding new, documented chapters to their own prosecution. Every hostile maneuver they execute serves as fresh material for the case against them, turning their defense into an accidental confession. Truth possesses a gravitational pull that eventually warps the entire trajectory of reality back to center. This realignment is already in motion, requiring nothing from you but your continued existence outside their chaos. When the impact occurs, you aren't just getting your reputation back. You are reclaiming a stolen legacy. Your legal identity was harvested to fertilize a financial harvest you were never told existed. That redirected wealth has a rightful destination, and that destination is your own hands. The value they extracted using your name is a debt that the law is uniquely equipped to collect. The Observer's Archive creates a concrete foundation for a reckoning that is purely mathematical in its precision. This is about traceable assets, dated authorizations, and the forensic trail of your harvested persona. Consult with a legal specialist to prepare for this transition. When your signature and likeness are weaponized for secret profit, the corrective measures provided by the justice system are massive and transformative. Beyond the material restoration, your social standing is about to undergo a spectacular purification. The ghost of you that they whispered into being, the fictional villain they crafted to mask their own greed, is about to be vaporized by the clinical findings of a professional audit. A fabricated myth cannot survive a collision with a verified life. When a comprehensive investigation concludes that you are a soul of genuine character and unyielding kindness, the lie doesn't just fade. It becomes a testament to the malice of the liars. Your standing will be greater than before because the contrast between their slander and your proven reality creates a brilliance that no one can ignore. The obstruction that has plagued your career and personal growth is being systematically dismantled. It wasn't the universe blocking you. It was a group of people who needed you sidelined to ensure their own survival. They can no longer sustain that barricade. True resolution is a rhythmic, unstoppable force that gains power through its deliberate pace. Once the specialist's dossier enters the correct institutional hands, the process becomes an administrative avalanche. Each document will be cross-referenced, each unauthorized transaction scrutinized, and each fraudulent use of your identity measured against the true value it generated. Your existence, which they tried to treat as a liability, has become the final piece of the puzzle that exposes a much vaster conspiracy. You weren't just a target in their game. You were the unintended catalyst for the entire system's collapse. You are a force of perpetual motion, a presence that proves the most effective way to dismantle a blockade is to accelerate toward your purpose so intensely that the impact of the truth shatters every barrier in its path. Construction is your only mode of existence. You do not pause for permission or wait for the debris to clear. Every endeavor you have initiated, every alliance you have cultivated, and every vision that was temporarily throttled by malicious interference must now be amplified. By the time the final obstacles dissolve, your velocity will be your greatest asset, ensuring you are already at full speed when the horizon opens up. Take a focused inventory of those who stood as solid ground beneath your feet during this turbulence. The individuals who refused to let an orchestrated smear campaign distort their vision of your character are your true foundation. Deepen your commitment to these spirits, for when the dust settles, you will need a reliable crew to build the grander reality that awaits. Regarding those who faltered and allowed themselves to be swayed by the toxic static of the Shadow Collective, offer them a detached benevolence from a safe distance. Resentment is a fire that consumes the host, but forgiveness does not grant a front row seat back into your inner sanctum. This chapter merely acted as a chemical reagent, revealing the true composition of your social circle. When the tide turns and they attempt to migrate back, driven by the undeniable weight of the emerging facts, you are under no obligation to provide a spectacle or an explanation. You need not wave a flag of triumph. Simply persist in being the individual the forensic audit revealed, the one whose private pulse matches their public word with surgical precision. The architect of this campaign operated under the illusion of a total monopoly on power, convinced that their decades of social grooming and strategic leverage had created an atmosphere where the truth could never breathe. They believed their fortresses were impenetrable, and their influence was an absolute law. What they failed to calculate was the anomaly of your essence. They never anticipated the fallout of a cold-blooded professional scrutinizing your soul and finding a resonance so pure that it short-circuited their cynicism. They didn't plan for the high-priced lens they bought to find a stain to instead become a guardian of your light. This is the core of your sovereignty, not the absence of enemies, but the possession of a reality so authentic that it transforms the very instruments of your destruction. You didn't persuade the specialist through rhetoric. You rewired their perspective by simply remaining a constant in a world of variables. The rising panic within the enemy's walls, the splintering of their forced loyalties, and the hysterical shrieking of the most compromised members are all symptoms of a system that has reached its expiration date. Every attempt they make to discredit the one person who holds the keys to their ruin is merely the sound of a falling empire. You have triumphed by doing nothing other than refusing to be anyone else. You appeared, You maintained your frequency when the world tried to jam it. You guarded your internal sanctuary in a climate designed to turn it into a wasteland. You remained defiantly, beautifully, and dangerously yourself. The ultimate validation has already been achieved. After an exhaustive, well-funded hunt for a single shadow in your history, the only conclusion reached was that you are the genuine article. They financed a hunter to stalk you, yet that hunter has become a sentry, compelled by an awakened conscience to ensure the truth prevails. The momentum has shifted. Remain anchored. Keep your focus. This isn't the conclusion of your struggle. It is the grand inauguration of your true path.